This is my summary of what we've spoken about prior to this talk. And why did I do this? I did this primarily because nobody will talk to me. Nobody's asked to hear my side of the story. And this is the only way I know how to get it out to the public. You'll know that from our previous presentations that for the first 30 years the King family relied on law enforcement to solve these murders. We trusted them implicitly. And after 30 years, they did not have one suspect that they could tell us about except for Christopher Bush and Vince Gunnels. This story wouldn't have taken place if Pat Coffey hadn't talked to Larry Wasser in 2006. And we didn't ask for any information until October the 27th, 2009, when the task force finally agreed to meet with my family. We had asked for that, as you'll recall, for 6 to 8 months before that. We had 2 fixed dates to meet with the task force, and both of those were canceled by the task force. On October the 16th, the family of Kristine Mihelich want to meet with the task force about the status of the investigation, and on Monday, October the 19th, they're given the information that we had been asking for those several months. And they identified 3 suspects. I think they called them persons of interest: Christopher Bush, Gregory Green, and Vince Gunnels. When we met on October the 27th and none of our questions were answered, I became quite angry. And then, even angrier, on March the 1st, 2010, when Jessica Cooper didn't have the guts to call me, but had Chief Stutt call me and tell me that Bush and Gunnels were not involved. And as you know from the previous talks, we had no reason, we just wanted to know the reason why they had been eliminated. As we went through these various talks and previously, nobody gave us any information indicating that Bush and Gunnels were not involved. I've been told by police officers there's no adverse facts, so that every fact about the Bush and Gunnels involvement has not been changed, in my judgment. I want to take you back to the book by John Walsh, Tears of Rage. His 5-year-old son Adam was kidnapped and murdered, and for 15 years there was no resolution of the case. John Walsh opposed a request by the media 15 years later to get access to the files. The prosecutor was on his side. They argued vigorously that giving the media or the public access to files would result in never solving the case. The judge down in Florida did a smart thing, in my judgment. She said to the law enforcement people, "You got 6 months to solve this case, and if not, I'm going to release the information to the public." And after 6 months, the information was released. The media got the word out. Witnesses who had never appeared before came forth with testimony relating Adam Walsh to one of the suspects named O'Toole. When you read the book, you also find there were several other police officers who had their own suspects. And the police officers none of them would concede, and no action was taken. They couldn't charge O'Toole, just like they can't charge Bush. But with the additional testimony they got from these other witnesses, everybody involved concluded that O'Toole was the culprit. And that's an indication of what I would like done in this case. I would like to have all this information we've talked about out to the public in hopes that somebody will realize it wasn't a blue gremlin or that there are other suspects that they should cover. My daughter referred me to the book Columbine, and for those of you who were born after the 1990, That was a high school massacre by 2 students. I think they killed more than a dozen students and injured far more than that. And if their bomb in the cafeteria had gone off, would have killed hundreds of children. A tragedy that 2 students also killed themselves, so that we have dead suspects again. A friend of these 2 boys went to his mother and said, and I forget their names, but they're building bombs. And his mother went to the police a couple of times, and finally somebody prepared a search warrant affidavit, and we've gone over search warrant affidavits previously. The reporter for the New York Times went to the city officials several days after the incident and asked if they had any advance notice that these 2 boys were troublemakers. And they were a dozen city officials, including the sheriff and the deputy sheriff who prepared the search warrant affidavit to go look at these 2 boys' houses, were there. The elected officials, a dozen of them, sat in a room, and they were told, do not tell anybody about this information we got from this young man's mother, because there's a 1-year statute of limitations, and the county will be broke if we have to defend all of these civil lawsuits. And funds were made available from the public to assist these families, and they were distributed to most of them without the necessity of a lawsuit. But fortunately, one recalcitrant father wasn't willing to settle over his son's death. The deputy sheriff came forth 4 or 5 years later and acknowledged that he had prepared an affidavit and that the Columbine County, or whatever county name it is, had advance notice of this possibility. Now, many people have said to me, Barry, nobody could cover up this situation in your son's death. I take you back to Columbine. A dozen people sat in a room and agreed to lie. Elected officials, people with responsible positions. As I go and reflect on what happened, I have 4 major concerns. The first one is the red herring blue gremlin. A blue gremlin, in my judgment, was never involved. And for all 4 kids, there are references in the police reports to Pontiac automobiles. The search warrant, as I told you, bothers me more as a lawyer than a father. And I don't to this day know why they finally agreed in the 48th District Court to give me that search warrant and search warrant affidavit on April 1st, 2013. The same information I had been asking for since we started our FOIA cases back in early 2010. That search warrant affidavit, I'll remind you, was prepared by the Oakland County prosecutor and was signed by the Michigan State Police. And it clearly indicates, 8 pages, single-spaced, that there was Bush and Gunnell's involvement in these murders. And that information was available to Jessica Cooper on March the 1st, 2010, when she told me that they were not involved. I can understand why they tried to hide that information from me, because her office prepared something directly contrary to what she was telling me. Somebody should explain that to us. The third thing I've had concern about was the polygraph tests. And we've gone through that previously. Somebody passes the polygraph test, that's fine, they're released and put back out in the street to abuse other boys. So 3 guys say that original result was incorrect, but we can't give it to you, Mr. King. And somebody in the Michigan Court of Appeals is going to have to determine that for us, because we have not had any excess previously. And I've also read you the unredacted copy of the Gunnell's polygraph test. stone cold, completely in capital letters, flunked it. We didn't know about that until November of last year. The Michigan State Police had redacted those results from the initial reports we got. And when the Oakland County prosecutor gave me that information in November, my guess is somebody forgot to read it. But we do know that Gunnels, in July of 2009, flunked a lie detector test about his relationship with Kristine Mihelich, and that information was also available to the prosecutor on March the 1st, 2010. The other major concern I've had is over the Oakland County grand jury. It's my understanding that shortly after Jessica Cooper took office, the police brought to her a number of cold cases. If what I read in the paper is correct, the grand jury did charge 2 individuals with 2-decade or so old murders, that they were tried and convicted. And I recall reading in the paper that Jessica Cooper said, yes, you can convict somebody on circumstantial evidence. This is the same circumstantial evidence that detectives Williams and Gray told their superiors was present in this case. However, when this case goes public, Jessica Cooper goes public and says it has to be solved by scientific knowledge. She contradicts herself, as usual. She can't talk out of one side of her mouth. And I've heard rumors that the Oakland County child killing case was inserted into the grand jury after it was formed. I don't know that for truth, and I would like somebody to tell me whether those rumors were true. I think that I was the only person called that has any familiarity with the Bush and Gunnels involvement. I've been advised by the Mihelich family that they didn't appear before the grand jury. I've been advised by Patrick Coffey that his family, by Mike Stebbins, that his family was not called. And I was told by Pat Coffey, who originated the Bush lead, that he was not called. I don't know if they brought other suspects to the grand jury, but my guess and understanding is that nobody followed up to the grand jury on the Bush and Gunnels lead, which we've discussed ad infinitum in this case. And I would like somebody to clarify that for me. If the Oakland County prosecutor instituted a grand jury proceeding only to embarrass me, she ought to be sanctioned and the public ought to know about it. If it was brought because of other suspects, I will apologize for these comments. But until somebody tells me what the facts are, I have to tell you what I think. So where are we now in the investigation? I only have conjecture and suspicion to guide me, coincidence also, the same elements that Jessica Cooper took when she charged me with a crime. We wouldn't be here today, in my judgment, if Kathy hadn't called Livonia. If she'd have called the state police, I don't think this ever would have surfaced. And take you back to 1977, the emphasis is in Oakland County. Wayne County's an adjunct only because Tim's body was found there. But they started out with a clean slate, did a marvelous investigation. When I read the police reports, the 3,411 pages that I received on December 15, 2010, I had nothing but praise for Williams and Gray about what they did. What happened subsequent to all of that? I'll take you back to the John Walsh case. Several police officers had their own guy, and none of them were willing to give up. Some guy had O'Toole, some guy had the gentleman that Mrs. Walsh had an affair with, and a couple of other guys thought their guy was the person. Our goal in this case is to solve it, not to let everybody discuss their own suspects. And I think there's some jealousy in law enforcement, both at the prosecutorial and the police level, that they all want the case solved, but they want to solve it. They want to be the person that gets their picture on the cover page of Time magazine. And also, every time they go public with these, a prosecutor speaks. Prosecutors don't solve cases, cops do. And I would like to have every police officer that thinks they have a valid suspect come forward. I've been asked this several times, what do I want done, in my recent media interviews. I've terminated every one by saying I would like Jessica Cooper, Kim Worthy, Colonel E2, Sheriff Bouchard, and whoever else is in charge, the decision makers, not the foot soldiers, to designate somebody to sit down in one room for a couple of days, preferably with me, and put all the stuff on the table instead of trying to hide it. I'd like somebody to explain to me, after the October 27, 2009 meeting, why Oakland County created its own task force. As you recall, Lieutenant Miller told me that he got involved in late December 2009 or early January. Reading between the lines, I believe Oakland County was upset that they were not involved in this earlier. They probably had some semi-leads. And then, as we've discussed previously, all of the communication between Oakland County and Wayne County terminated. I'd like somebody to explain to me why, when he retired, the Michigan State Police reports indicate that when the case is solved, that Corey Williams ought to be brought forward because he was the lead guy involving Bush and Gunnels. 2 months later, you can almost hear the state police laughing that we finally got rid of Williams. That decision was not made by Gary Gray, the investigating officer. That decision was made by a decision maker. And the decision makers won't talk to me. I think they should. I agree, and have publicly said, that the Sloan lead is a good lead. They've got mitochondrial DNA matches between hairs found on Mark and Tim, with an automobile driven by a convicted pedophile. They've had that information for more than 3 years and nothing's been developed. In our case, we do have a mitochondrial DNA match between a suspect, Vince Gunnels, and nobody will follow up on it. I don't see the difference. So in summary, my request is that the decision makers, who should have reviewed everything that I've reviewed, sit down and talk with me and tell me what is happening and the status of the case. And that's why I created this video.